Peak Human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
Peak 人間
Peak Craniofacial.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Peak Human Podcast. I'm Brian Sanders, and I'm making the Food Lies film, and I'm working on it daily, and it's going to be super great. I guarantee it. It's taking forever, I know, but we're still going strong. I'm doing this podcast every week so I can continue to learn and interview awesome people and make the film even better. Do my social media on Food Lies, search any platform. And I always say go back and start at episode 1 of this podcast. There's so much great stuff. It's like a free audio course. People have been changing their lives listening to it. Give it a review if you like it. That's free and that's easy. Today I'm talking to Dr. Stephen Lin, who's an awesome functional dentist. And after all my Weston Price talk, it's time to get a bit deeper with someone who really knows what they're talking about and studies him and puts his teachings into practice. Weston Price is a great scientist and was a dentist and traveled the world in the 1930s, and I bring him up a lot. And I'm not saying that he's the end-all be-all of nutrition or that he had everything figured out, but he kind of did. He did have some great observations and studied people before Western society took over and there was no one left to study. And the best part is it's all been pretty much proved out with all our modern science. So that's why I like him so much. So why I keep bringing him up is because it's just a great way to illustrate points through observations plus the new modern science that confirm it. So more about my guest. Dr. Stephen Lin is a world-leading functional dentist, TEDx speaker, and author of the international #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Dental Diet. As a passionate preventative whole health advocate, Dr. Lin focuses on the understanding of dental disease through nutritional principles. His work has highlighted that crooked teeth and the other orthodontia epidemic are diet-based problems and the need for public health policy to prevent braces in the next generation of children. All right, so how is this podcast possible? I don't have any ads. I don't have commercial breaks. I don't bring up other people's products because I do my own whole food products at Nose to Tail. That's nosetotale.org. Instead of taking on sponsors, a long time ago, I decided to not take any money from any companies and just do everything myself. And it's just the way I want to do it, even though I don't make as much money. So what am I doing over at Nose to Tail? We have grass-fed, grass-finished beef, ethically, sustainably raised. We have all the organs, the bones. We have primal beef with the organs mixed in, liver, heart, kidney, and spleen. This is a really handy and delicious way to get organs in your diet. We raise it in Texas and ship it to your door. We also have the high omega-3, low omega-6 pork and chicken. Really great stuff with the sausage, the bacon, all with the low omega-6, low PUFAs. This stuff is awesome. It's really expensive to raise. We have to feed them a special diet with super low omega-6s. They don't get all the monocropped grains, but it's worth it. You get that quality product with that really great ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, very close to 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. So get that at nosetotale.org. We ship it out each week. It's best to order before Monday so we can get it out on Monday. Got a bunch of new products coming very soon. I just got the seasonings in. Small batch, no sugar, no fillers, no nothing. All fresh, really great stuff. Got the beef tallow, skincare products, lip balm, soap, skin food, deodorant coming soon, hair pomade coming soon. Super exciting. All kinds of other food products coming that I can't talk about yet. Just go to nosetotale.org and you'll see them soon. Also, we have the Sapien program where if you're really serious about making a change in your life and losing weight and reversing disease, we've got your back. We've got Dr. Gary on board. We're doing an online program you can do anywhere in the world, 10 weeks. We have health coaches, we have materials, videos, all kinds of things. Go to sapien.org and you can sign up now at a discount. We also have the Sapien Tribe where you get the bonus episodes of this podcast. You get all the extra content. You get the extended show notes, the private feed, Zoom calls with Dr. Gary and our health coach Becker, and more. So support the show in any of those ways, nosetotale.org or sapien.org. And now here's my new pal, Dr. Stephen Lin. Okay, Dr. Stephen Lin, calling in from Australia. How you doing?
I'm well, Brian. How are you?
I am great. It's a Friday afternoon for you, Saturday morning. Where are you at exactly?
So I'm just north of Sydney. Yeah, so it's Saturday morning here. So yeah, generally talking to the west coast of the States, we have to get up early in the morning. Yeah, but for you guys, like nice Friday afternoon, right?
Yeah, Labor Day weekend for us. And how do you describe what you do? I mean, I know you're a dentist, but do you describe yourself as just a dentist?
Well, I was originally trained as a dentist, but before that, I was trained in biomedical science. After training in dentistry, I started to look at the way dentistry was practiced, and I began to think that things could be done a bit differently. So
Mhm.
now I would say I train myself. I spent a lot of years looking at the way functional medicine interfaces with dentistry, and so what I practice now is functional dentistry, and I've been kind
Mm.
of going down a rabbit hole of exploring how root cause medicine really connects to the oral systemic link, and that dental diseases are the marker point for everything that's happening in the body. And at a foundational level, which is what I wrote my book on, is in diet nutrition, is that we have to eat the right foods to nourish our teeth. And that when we don't, that's when things go wrong in the mouth and then subsequently through the body. Yeah. So functional dentistry is all about interfacing functional medicine. One thing I found with functional medicine is that no one talks about the mouth at all. No one understands it.
Mm.
Dentists are really kind of isolated. So that was a problem point I found in society in general. And yeah, I've kind of spent my life trying to put those pieces together.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've just kind of caught on to this functional dentistry idea lately. I think most of doctors and healthcare professionals are a little bit too siloed in their fields, and the functional approach is great. And everyone should be doing this because it's looking at the body holistically.
Totally. It's when dentists are trained, we're actually taught this oral systemic link, and the literature goes back quite a long way now, showing, gum disease and risk of heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all these things we see in the mouth first, bleeding gums, inflammatory markers. They're really easily picked up in the mouth. The evidence is there, but the application when you get out into the world is that you actually just kind of see a person come in, you look into their mouth, you'll try and fix a broken tooth, or you'll clean some plaque off some teeth to stop the bleeding, but you don't ask any deeper questions because you're not speaking to other health professionals that are wondering why this is happening in the body as a whole. Dentistry is kind of missed, been a bit isolated maybe in society in that sense because there's kind of a funny way of we've economically isolated where it's not covered by health insurance typically. But then the consequence is that people don't see it like that either. When you have a tooth problem, you go and you just want it fixed and that's it. And you don't ask deeper questions. But functional dentists ask those bigger questions.
It's so important. Yeah, but it really isn't the dentist's place really to give nutrition advice, right, in our modern world. And I've certainly never gotten anything close to a single thought about nutrition from a dentist. And I know a lot of dentists actually. I'm from Hawaii, and for some reason, a lot of my friends became dentists, and they've never heard of Weston Price. They've never heard of anything to do with nutrition, and they, like a lot of people caught up, or doctors caught up in just allopathic medicine, just kind of mask symptoms and treat symptoms and don't go to the root cause.
That's an unfortunate kind of application that we have of dental medicine now. I'm going to go in for bat for your dental friends here, is that they were probably some of the earliest people in your life telling you about sugar, right? Maybe you shouldn't eat as much sugar.
Yeah.
So like dentists have kind of been jumping up and down about sugar from about, probably a few decades now, way before we started to talk about sugar with systemic and metabolic issues. And that's because we know the causal connection of what it has, what it does in the mouth in terms of tooth decay. But we've had this silly disconnect where, we don't link that into, what's that diet doing in terms of risk of type 2 diabetes, in terms of risk to gut issues. And it's unfortunate, but dentists actually do have diet recommendations in terms of, some of the item codes you can charge and give to your patients. We do it. It's just not very conventional. It's not very widely known. And dentists are trained in it, at most schools to an extent. You'll do some kind of dietary count of sugars or just of acidic wear, for instance, is really important today. But it's very superficial, and sugar has kind of taken the focus of what dietary recommendations a dental setting should be, but it's only the surface level. And that's kind of, I think, what's detracted maybe for why there hasn't been a more dental focused dietary conversation.
Yeah, well, people don't really connect that. And you started off by saying there's a huge connection. And I know that now, but why is there such a huge connection? Why? I've known this for a while, but before this, had no clue that it's like your dental health is a window to your health. Why though?
Yeah, it's such a web of physiology and even goes back into, ancient medicine. But what we've kind of discovered at the simplest level, in 2008, the Human Microbiome Project showed that we live amongst trillions of microbes. And everyone's talking about gut microbes at the moment, but very few people are talking about is the oral microbiome. This is also something the dentists were talking about. We were talking about bacterial issues in the gut and, even in metabolic issues and so forth. But tooth decay is a bacterial imbalance. And we've called it an infection, which is probably a misnomer where we misunderstand, the true processes. But bacteria, we swallow them, thousands of them every second of the day, in constant communication with the gut, which we now know forms the immune system. And dental diseases, both periodontal disease and tooth decay, which are the most common chronic diseases in the world across children and all age groups, are bacterial diseases. And we know these are then interfacing into the gut, which is speaking to the immune system, which is speaking to the brain. The mouth-body connection has basically shown itself in the last decade, and we're about to put all the pieces together, or we're putting the pieces together.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, this gut microbiome stuff is super interesting. And yeah, I feel like it's the new frontier and it's great. And it seems to be, the root cause of so many problems and solutions, really. But I'll tell this quick story. I told it before, but I thought it was really interesting that the only time I've ever had cavities in my life was my college years and a few years after. And I just realized that's when I was eating the worst. That was my worst diet. Like growing up, we made all our own food and it was decent enough and it got me some nutrition. And then the college days, I just didn't have the good nutrition and it fell apart. And then I just came back again. And now I go to the dentist and they're just like, why are you here? You have perfect mouth. Like we can't even do anything. Like they just kick me out.
Yeah. And that's how it should be. Kind of looking at what human teeth have been for the vast majority of time that we've walked on planet Earth, is that teeth are perfect. And in any biological system, you don't get tooth decay. So the only time you get tooth decay is when you eat a modern industrialized diet, so a packaged supermarket food diet, and when you put animals into zoos, so they'll get tooth decay too. In any biological system, you don't get crooked teeth, you don't get decayed teeth, and you don't get periodontal disease. You see this in the fossil records going back as well. We had perfect teeth, and it's all connected into what we eat. That story you told is really, really common because, parents have a control of what we eat, during our, maybe younger adolescence. And as we go into fly away from the coop and go to college or whatever, we change our diets. And that's often when people see some issues if they haven't before. But then the bigger issue is that when parents aren't told exactly how to feed a child to grow, a jaw to prevent tooth decay in a younger child, this is a broader societal issue where the way our mouths connect to our food is affecting us at all ages.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're definitely going to get into that and reproduction and growing a great jaw and facial structure and teeth. But well, first, how did you even get into Weston Price? How did you first catch on? Because was it taught in your school or did you find it on your own?
I had never heard of Weston Price. So after I finished dental school, I went out and practiced in the world, and I was in dental school, you learn a lot of physical skills, and it's really difficult, and you learn a lot in a short amount of time. Then you've got to go out into the world and learn how to do them. And dentists have this big challenge in their initial years of applying their clinical skills to the world, to patients, to find out what kind of dentist they're going to be. Some people are really into restorative work, some people into endodontics. I was kind of doing that, and I found kind of my groove in terms of what kind of dentistry I was doing. But then I kind of hit my roof. I felt like I wasn't really developing very much. And there's kind of different furthering education you can do, like implants or surgeries or things like that, and just didn't really kind of float my boat. So I was kind of like, I'm going to take some time off and think about if I really want to do this. I was seeing that I was fixing things a lot, and I wasn't able to answer a lot of questions that a lot of my patients had. They were asking me, why is this disease popping up in this child, not this child? Why did I get this? My sibling never got anything. There were questions that I just didn't know, and I was starting to look into textbooks and I just wasn't getting answers. So I took some time off. I was like, I don't know if I want to be a dentist. I don't know if this is for me, if it's going to be fulfilling. I took some time off. I traveled through Europe and I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and I was in a traveler's hostel there, and there was a shared reading shelf there, and I found a book, a guy named Weston A. Price, DDS, and kind of the title caught my eye and I picked it up. I looked at this thing, nutrition and physical degeneration, and I didn't know what it was. And I opened it up and I had no idea. There was all these black and white pictures of all these people with smiles and then teeth. And I had a quick scan of it then, and I honestly didn't really kind of get what it was about. But I actually put it in my bag and I came back to it a few years later. And when I opened it up in that second time that I looked at it, I was like, I really don't understand this and I need to. And then that was kind of the opening, and I began to really kind of dive into what Price was what he was, writing. And I realized that there was a whole picture between what I had been trained, 70 years later after he published the work, to, me sitting in a dental practice talking and to patients about the issues that he was trying to warn people about. And the whole thing was completely misunderstood. And so that was kind of the journey I started to go on, and to see that there were other solutions there, and there were other ways we could look at the mouth, not just fix teeth, in this reactionary way.
That's great. Yeah. I usually bring them up every other podcast. It's kind of a running joke almost, but maybe you could dive into, just tell his story. Like, for people who maybe haven't heard all my shows, you should definitely go back and start at episode 1. I always say that in the intro. But what did he do? Who was he? What was his big discoveries? Why don't you just give his history?
Absolutely, Brian. And Weston A. Price is one of the most important health writers, I think, of the 20th century. And he was a dentist who practiced in Ohio, and he was a Canadian. But he was a big guy in the early 20th century. He was the head of the ADA research. He actually founded the ADA research arm. And a lot of his work was very widely known. He's an esteemed guy. And he did a lot of research on a few different areas in dentistry, one on root canal treatments that people might be aware of. He's probably a little bit more infamous for. There's kind of a story on that too. And his major work, which was nutrition and physical degeneration. And so his whole thesis was, he was in Ohio, right, looking at people's teeth. And he thought, I've heard people say that there are populations of humans out there that don't get dental disease. And he wasn't seeing this in his practice. And he was like, well,
what year is this?
This was, say, like the 20s. Yeah. So the early 1900s. So he was kind of doing this research. He published earlier. And then through the 20s, I think he began to assemble his work for nutrition and physical degeneration, which he published in 1933, I think it was. Well, it might have been 38, like actually. Yeah,
whatever.
There was a few different, what he ended up doing was he went around the world, and it was nearly a 12-year study that he went to 9 different places into the depths of all these indigenous cultures. And what he looked at was, he was found where people lived on foods and traditional cultures they had for thousands of years. And he found where these people had started to interface with the modern world. So where the people had started to get access to modern foods, where roads had started to come in, where the food supply began to change. And he began to measure the dental health of the people that were comparatively still on their traditional diets, and the people that were beginning to eat these modern foods. And what he found was that there was a stark border in one generation. Once you begin to eat these foods, the teeth began to rot markedly. The tooth decay rose to modern rates, over 30%. But what he also found was teeth became crooked in one generation. So the dental arches weren't developing. This is huge. This is what I really didn't. I was looking at these things, and he would take photos. Think about the early 1920s, 1930s with black and white photography is really rare at the time. You don't see much footage of World War I and II and so forth. So for him to document this in photograph is really impressive. And so he put together this document of 9 different cultures all across the world, and how their faces were developing. So that you see the pictures and you see how they degenerate in one generation of eating these foods. And so he began to compare what they were eating. So he would look at he went to the Swiss Alps, he went to the the Gaelic Islands of the North Gaelic Islands of Scotland. He went to the Maasai tribe in Africa. He went to indigenous tribes in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, Peru, the Inuit in Canada and North America. He looked at nearly all across the world, not mainland China. That was one spot he didn't go to. And he looked at the way what they were eating. And so all these people ate different foods, but he began to see that there was a common theme, and that animal fats and these deeply satiating foods that they would treasure. So in the Swiss Alps, he found that dairy was a big part of the culture because they lived right next to the mountains where the fast-growing spring grass would sprout up, and they would take the cows up and they would eat this grass. And then there would be this treasuring process of the dairy that they would make the butter fat and the cheese and then eat the cows as well. And so what he did is he took that butter home and he compared it to the butter back in Ohio, and he found that the nutrients in these foods that these people were eating were 10 to 20 times richer in fat-soluble vitamins. So vitamin A and D. And this was something that people knew at the time. It was only pretty new. Like rickets had kind of just popped up in the late 1800s, but vitamin D was pretty new. And he was saying, well, hang on, people of these traditional societies were really stocking up on this A and D. But he also identified a third factor that he wrote in Nutrition and Physical Degeneration that he never identified. He wrote it as activator X. And when I first read it, it was confusing, right? Because it didn't kind of drop what was going on. He actually died, and this is where Price's work kind of fell away. So he died, it was roughly 10 years after he published. His work fell away. He was widely criticized for his work on root canal treatments, which is now starting to pop up again, by the way, like the systemic effects of root canals. And this is what he was talking about. He was measuring bacteria in root-treated teeth and showing that you could reproduce disease in rabbits, for instance, by reproducing these bacteria in certain root canals. And he was just showing a systemic connection between teeth. But so what happened is that root canals were previously banned, and then they were reinstated, and then his work was thrown out. But the nutrition work was thrown out with the root canal work. So that's where he kind of gets his infamous side. That's why the dental fraternity don't really acknowledge him, because he's seen as the anti-root canal guy. And then there was all this kind of leads in his nutrition work that just got left. And it took the Weston A. Price Foundation, nearly 70 years later, Chris Masterjohn finally put it all together, that they found this research in Japan and Eastern Europe where they were looking at these molecules called quinones, menaquinones and phylloquinones. And phylloquinones is vitamin K1, which medical and dental students are taught about. But they were looking at this very similar molecule called the menaquinone that behaves similarly to K1, but very differently as well. And the molecule is very similar. And K1 actually converts to a menaquinone in the body. And they actually lined up that activator X was these menaquinone molecules that was vitamin K2. That was one of the biggest things of Price's work that was so important, because we still don't acknowledge vitamin K2 today as an activator of calcium, because he said that, look, these foods, they need vitamin A, they need vitamin D, and they need this activator. When you have the three factors, the body assimilates bones and teeth. You get immunity to tooth decay, you get bones that grow wide, you get straight teeth. When you don't have one, it doesn't work. But then the research really didn't play out until nearly 60 to 70 years later to actually understand what this activator X was. And the Japanese were way ahead, and they've already mandated vitamin D and vitamin K2 as a treatment for osteoporosis, which we don't do in the Western world. And so there was this huge disconnect, and that's kind of where I was kind of led to, is like, why aren't dentists talking about these nutrients? Why aren't we talking about having dental exams like yours, Brian, where people are coming in, and if they eat the right foods, the body sorts things out. And this is what Price was talking about. And there are scientific and nutrient-based understandings of what Price's work showed, but we've just missed the boat a little bit in understanding the process, or we're catching up in a way. And dental students really need to kind of be told Price's story and understood the context that it places in. It's not a modern scientific study in the way it was put together. People criticize it for that. But the precedence and the fundamental observational value of it is one of the...
It's huge.
It's huge. It's one of the most remarkable health studies of the 20th century, or ever.
It is. Well, and some of them were pretty well done. I read the book. Like some of them, he did do some sort of controlled experiments, and he gave one group the cod liver with the butter fat, and one didn't, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. That's true. Yeah, exactly. His work is really extensive. I actually connected to a dentist that was up in Chicago who thought they had someone that had all his original papers. I wonder if we can get a hold of that. But yeah, like all his work apparently is stored somewhere up that way. It'd just be a gold mine. But you're right. Like his work was just completely discarded, but the quality and the foundation as well, because these kind of foundational studies become what randomized controls and so forth later, because the industry and the educators have to understand the core processes. And that's what Price was doing. He was saying back then, he said, we're trying to treat the disease. We need to understand why this is happening and why the body, is behaving in these ways.
The root cause stuff. And so, yeah, he was doing way more than observation. Some people could dismiss him and like, oh, he just went around and took some photos. And that's not it. I mean, if you read the book, he did studies with different control groups and he did them across the world, not everywhere. He also brought the food back. Like you were saying, he brought the butter back. He brought a lot of these foods back and found how nutrient dense they were compared to our foods.
Yeah, he was comparing the nutrient density. Absolutely. So his work was completely misunderstood. He kind of wasn't around to defend it. And I think he kind of took a few barbs on different fronts that kind of, I think it kind of exhausted him later in his life. And maybe that was a contributor to why the work was lost. But, it's crazy that you've got dentists that are friends. All my dental friends don't know about Price.
Why can't they figure out about them? Because sometimes in nutrition, I understand why there's blockers. I mean, there's big food industry that pay the money for the TV commercials so that, the TV segments don't want to talk about putting down all their products. And, you can see the conflict of interest, but is there a direct conflict of interest to learn about Weston Price in dental school? I think why?
I think the problem is that what he put forward is very difficult to understand. We're talking about nutrients that really the biochemical pathways have only just been kind of understood well. And we're talking about craniofacial growth. There's kind of a side story on some different factors in Price's work that have different applications in the dental industry. One in particular is earlier in the 1900s, one of the foundational orthodontists that wrote the textbooks Angle's Orthodontics for dentists. This is like the seminal work of what orthodontic students still read today. In what happened is that he was saying that, you need to grow the jaw, you need to expand the jaw and fit the teeth. So broadly, that's what he was an advocate for. Later in the 40s and 50s and 60s, one of his students, a guy named Begg, actually came in and he did some anthropological studies and he twisted it a bit. And he said, like, well, when you look at all this wear on fossils and teeth of anthropological studies, we lose this amount of tooth space in our life. So actually, for this problem of crooked teeth, you can actually take teeth out and put braces on, and that would actually reproduce the amount of tooth normally lost over the life of a human through tooth wear. And then that brought in the 50s and 60s this kind of contraction metal braces based orthodontic technique that completely didn't look at or address the craniofacial form. So how the jaws grow to fit teeth. And that was really what Price was kind of talking about too, is like, look, when you compare these photos, these people, they get malocclusions in one generation. And so that's talking about a root cause. But the dentists weren't looking at, they had these amazing metal braces that could straighten teeth. And you think about how much easier that is to apply. There are ways now that we can actually prevent braces in kids. It's difficult, but you can expand and you can correct the jaws of a kid. But it's a difficult problem. And it's taken me kind of, like it's been a decade since I picked up the book, but it's been a good 8 years to really kind of where, in my practice today, I feel like we're starting to get into a flow where these things are starting to be applied. So it's a difficult problem. That's what I think. Yeah,
no, actually, so it is the same problem. It's just treating the symptoms, and we have the new things like pills. It's the same thing as the allopathic model of medicine, and just give the pill. It's easier. We can make money off it. People will want it. We can charge insurance for it, all that stuff. I guess you're right. I don't know why I didn't even just put it together immediately, is that it goes against that, and it's super hard, and you have to start before you even get pregnant. Like what Weston Price found was that these people would start 6 months before they were even pregnant. They would, around the world, they'd be eating these special diets.
Yeah, 6 to 12 months. And it's interesting, when I read that, I was like, it really opened my eyes. I was like, wow, so these people were planning what their bodies would have in them, 6 to 12 months before conceiving a child. And at the time I was, kind of learning and finding about epigenetic medicine and, how genes listen to the environment. And it makes total sense, especially when you look at these nutrients the Price is focusing on, vitamin D, vitamin A, they have gene messages and DNA receptors all through the body, thousands of them. And so if a vitamin D deficient mother will pass this vitamin D deficient epigenetic message to a child. And so that imprint is imprinting on her months and months and months before, probably years, actually definitely years, what our grandparents eat affected us. But this consideration as to how this affects a growing child is something we've just really lost. I've got young children now, and, I see this problem today in the growing generation when we disconnect ourselves from the appreciation of what food does to grow a jaw. For parents out there that are thinking about children or having a family or their children today, the thing they want to do is they don't want their kids to have holes in their teeth, and they want their kids to have a straight smile, right? And we've just lost that way of helping the bodies to do that. And this is what Price was trying to show us. And it's one of the most important health kind of messages, I think, that we're really not seeing. And it's affecting everyone. For the people that did grow up and grow good jaws, their children aren't now, because we've lost this way of understanding what Price was trying to tell us.
Yeah, it's more than just the smile and the holes in the teeth. It's the wide dental arch. It's the wide and not the slack-jawed look from the side, or from the side, it's out like a normal chin should be, and looking straight on, it's a wide face. And this is what this craniofacial development he saw was. So maybe you can jump into that a little bit and how that works. It sounds a little out there that you could just eat a couple vitamins, or more complicated than that, and get these drastic features of just the look of your entire face.
Yeah, this has been kind of a really hard area for me to understand, because there are dentists that still do this expansive kind of non-braces style orthodontics out there, but they haven't connected to Price's work. So they don't look at the nutritional basis of how the jaw grows. But kind of just go back to the story, I thought I'd just kind of outline some work that some dentists are doing up Anthropological Museum in Penn State, I think it is. And so they're finding that in utero now, the kids' lower jaws, so if you look at a baby today and you see the lower jaw, and like those chins are kind of, they're born very set back. And that is part of that system. So the upper and lower jaw, the maxilla and the mandible, is what makes up the platform for your teeth. And it's no accident whether your 32 teeth don't fit into your head. And it was actually Darwin's physician that noted that in the last kind of 100 years, as they were writing their work, that wisdom teeth stopped fitting. And it wasn't all that long ago that you don't have to go back very far to find 32 human teeth erupting with space behind the wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth erupt roughly between 20 and 25. But the problem of kids between 7 and 12 that are losing their kids' teeth and their adults' teeth are coming in, having crooked arches, is the same problem. It's craniofacial growth. It's not enough space. It's starting in the womb. So kids are born with jaws that aren't as developed as they used to be. You can compare the skulls. You see these jaws that don't sit out, sit forward. And so I think what you're describing is that the lips and the mouth really should kind of sit roughly straight down from the tip of the nose. And so when you have the lower jaw starting to set back, you start to get this profile, as you said, on the side. The jaw starts to kind of sink into the neck, and you start to lose that forward profile, right? And then the other aspects are the cheekbones and the angles of the jaw. For wisdom teeth, for example, between 15 and 20, we don't consider that as a big growth kind of phase for our jaw, but the jaw actually grows in 3 dimensions. It grows down and back. And so that's the space that wisdom tooth needs to come down. And that's actually where there should be bone behind that wisdom tooth. And there was I saw a gentleman grew up on a farm. He was about 60. He came into my practice a few years ago, and he came in. He had this wisdom tooth. He'd had a filling on it. He got an infection. He wanted it out, and I was kind of like, great. He kind of had like a bowling ball for a head. And anyway, so the tooth was fully erupted. So it was a terrible extraction because we were there. He had such strong bone. We were both had the worst afternoon of our life. But like what I noticed was that I was sitting there, the density of his bone was something I just don't see in kids today anymore. When you take wisdom teeth out of an adolescent or a young person in their early 20s, it's paper thin, and our bodies aren't placing bone like they used to. And if you look at the skulls of the paleoanthropologists, you see these huge mandibles and you see those 32 teeth sitting. This is the problem that Price was elucidating. He was showing in picture. He says, look at the facial development of these people. The teeth don't fit because their faces aren't developing. Now, he was saying this was due to nutrients. There's a whole area of dentistry that can actually fix this without braces now. So you can prevent braces, but they don't think about the nutrients. And the nutrients is the driving force. So bones, an endocrine organ, they're listening to hormonal signals. They're placing calcium with available nutrients. And the way our bodies place calcium is intrinsically linked to the fat-soluble vitamin system that Price was studying. And so when we're deficient in these fat-soluble vitamins, which come from a very specific set of foods, which he described and studied in his book, then we don't grow a skeletal system that calcifies in the way or develops in the way it normally does. In kids with vitamin D deficiency with rickets, their femur bones don't develop, and they have these kind of bow legs because their skeletal system is basically folding under the weight of their torso. And the way we cured that epidemic was cod liver oil. So on the other scale of it, though, the craniofacial system is the same. It's a musculoskeletal system that listens to forces. It's connected to breathing. It's connected to posture. It's connected to swallowing, and it's connected to the nutrients that we eat as well. And so we have this way of understanding craniofacial medicine now, which is what functional dentistry really is about. But kind of the final picture is to really place this into what we eat before we conceive a child and how the growth cycle of that child right through from when they're at a very young age, when they breastfeed, for instance, the way they use their tongue in breastfeeding. So kids with tongue ties today, that prevents the growth of the maxilla because the pressure of the tongue to the roof of the mouth expands the maxilla bone, and then the upper teeth begin to fit. That posture keeps the child's mouth closed and they breathe through the nose. The maxilla then breathes and pulsates and it expands. That's how you grow the craniofacial system properly. When you breathe through the mouth, the maxilla contracts and you get this mouth open, kind of what you'd say maybe slack-jawed, kind of skinny face. That's the functional adaptation to a slow-growing maxilla and mandible.
Yeah, it's all so crazy. So yeah, it starts with eating the foods, and the protective foods he talks about are these. It's the fat, it's eggs, it's organ meats, it's fish roe, it's seafood, it's all these things that in modern culture we think are bad for us or don't eat or don't like, or it's just insane to really have this good facial structure as we did a few thousand years ago before we started eating our modern diet. We had this and all our teeth fit and our face looked great. And you've seen the pictures, and I've seen people that have this. I met a Maasai guy at this conference I was speaking at, and he had the beautiful white teeth, the big face, the big, nice smile. Like, it's amazing what happens with his good genes and probably his good diet. And have you seen people, are there any people left in Australia or wherever you've encountered people that are eating correctly and have this great ancestral health in their face and jaw?
I live in a pretty, industrialized area, so it's fading. But the ones where you see the good development are the ones that have that closer connection to that generation of people that were. So islanders, so Pacific Islanders, I find have great facial development still because they grew up, or their parents grew up at least close to the sea in these areas where their genes just thrive with the fat soluble rich seafood and oysters and all those. Price described that crab trap of the Pacific Islanders where they would, I think I would fatten it up with coconut, right, before they would eat the
Oh, yeah.
the crab. Yeah, it sounded delicious. So the people I see that have this better facial development have an ancestral lineage that is closer to the land than what people from United Kingdom, England, and so forth. They're the worst. They're the ones that, that have longest connection to industrialized diet.
Well, I just saw a study that showed the percentage of ultra processed foods across Europe, and the UK had the most. It was over 50% of their foods were ultra processed. So it really makes sense.
And, they were the first to industrialize. My mum's Welsh, so I know a little bit about the UK, but when you go into supermarkets there, and the food culture there is definitely very much connected to this modern way of eating. And it's similar to, you've got the different styles to it, but the kind of supermarket food in the US as well, it's very highly processed. And the same here in Australia. But when you eat that for a long time, your teeth degenerate. Yeah, it's a no-brainer if you think about it. But
oh, you know what? Price called them the displacement foods, right? It displaced the natural good foods. It's almost like, there's all different ways to think of it. People know about flour and sugar and how much it raises your blood sugar and insulin problems and all that other stuff. But there's a whole nother side to it that's maybe even more simple, is it just displaces good food.
Totally. That's what we've kind of had this focus on, the bad foods and stuff. But Price's work really shows like, hey, you've got to eat these foods that have these high density of nutrients. And we just don't do it. And even people that are, so-called eating healthy today, I still see dental problems in them because they don't understand this traditional diet was so rich in fat soluble vitamins, organs. We just don't eat organs anymore. We don't, source these from animals that were on the land and so forth. And that's what Price was saying. He said, you have to eat these nutrients or you can put the bad stuff. And he named them all. He was like the sugars, the refined flours, and the vegetables. He straight up said it back then. And that's what we've put onto our plates. But I feel there's been quite a focus on the bad things, and instead of what we need to replace them with, which is really what Price's message was.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm promoting that. I got a company called Nose to Tail, and we sell the organ meats mixed into the hamburger, right? So you get the ground beef and you get it in there. So what are the things? It's organ meats, collagen, bone broth, fermented foods. It's basically all I talk about. I call it the sapient diet. It's just like what humans should eat. And it's sort of an array of ways of eating, but it includes nose to tail animal foods, collagen, bone broth, fermented foods, animal-based nutrition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The nose to tail kind of concept is so foreign to us now. Products like yours, and we can interface this back. It took me a while to kind of get used to it. I don't know. How did you what was the first time that you went back to organ meats? What was that like for you?
Well, no, I just got into this health world and I eventually found my way to this. It didn't start that way and I wasn't used to them. It didn't taste great to me in the beginning, and I'm learning it. And I think it's a great message that Weston Price found that these kids were eating them from birth and you're used to it and your palate like gets used to it. And we don't have that here. And a lot of other cultures do still have that, but not in sort of westernized places. So yeah, I started eating it mixed in with the organs with my company, or I've had some raw liver and you just kind of like swallow it. And there's a few ways. I cook it with some onions and garlic.
Yeah. Onions and garlic. I've got a 6-month-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my 6-month-year-old has her, she has eggs. We're kind of putting breast milk in at the moment, but we put Decay liver and cod liver oil mixed up, and she eats it. It's her diet's even better now than our 2-year-old, who you don't know any different, right? And it's in the preparation too. But there's great ways to kind of, instead you can get hiding it in the meat. I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah.
So what about fermented foods? How does that work with tooth health or the microbiome and all that?
Yeah, that was a story that Price probably didn't pick up so much. He was kind of like really focused on fat solubles, which is pretty cool because that was kind of the most important bit. But the fermenteds in the cultures, he also noted that they had these fermentation processes, and whether it was for grain products, whether it was for vegetables, whether it was their meats, they had these ways of storing foods. So ferments, and whether it's lacto fermentation or some of the different types you can get, like apple cider vinegars and so forth, they cultivate a very diverse microbial environment. And so when you're eating these things, you're introducing microbes, what we would call probiotic. And in the mouth, what they find is that they measure in the gut microbiome of hunter-gatherers and so forth, people still living on the land and so forth. They have this very diverse gut microbiome. So you have to have touched everything, right? And that's when your immune system's in place. That's when you don't get chronic illness. It's the same in the mouth. The studies show that when you scrape plaque off the anthropological jaws or the teeth, you find that the dental plaque of our ancestors had many more types of bacteria than they do today. So when we lose diversity in the mouth, that's when you get tooth decay, that's when you get gum disease, because you lose that bacterial balance and ecological environment that actually our body is designed to live with. So fermented foods are a great way. Kefir is a great one. Lactobacillus species, for instance, there's a small amount of studies out there that show that they're protective for tooth decay, protective for gum disease. It's a part of the system. And yeah, one thing focusing on the fat-soluble vitamins, which is the strategies around how you get organ meats into the diet, but ferments as part of the plant-based. That's what our ancestors did.
Yeah. And how much of it is sugar? Okay, sugar, we talk about sugar being the problem, and of course it's a problem in many different ways. Do you know how much of it is just the fact that it's sitting on your teeth, which is kind of what I grew up thinking, and then how much of it is that it's what it's doing inside your body or displacing food? You know what I mean? Like, is it the nutrition base? Because I thought I remember from the book, he was talking about some of these cultures, they were eating starches, or some of them were chewing on sugar cane or something, but they still didn't get cavities because they had all the fat soluble vitamins and the good diet. So it was was it protecting them? Their teeth were so strong they didn't get the cavities, or is there more to it?
Yeah, Price showed across the board that oral hygiene wasn't a big part of these cultures' practices. They didn't really care about it.
They didn't have Colgate and toothbrushes and all that.
They did not have that. And he noted kind of like some cultures would have green slime on their teeth, literally. But he said under that green slime, the teeth were as white as could be, as hard as could be. And so the sugar and plaque, so kind of the whole theories on tooth decay has kind of shifted between factors inside the body and to factors outside throughout since the Greeks. So when we get to kind of the 80s and 90s, where we're talking about the bacterial, the plaque factor, and when sugar gets stuck on teeth, well, the oral microbiome shows us that you really need these diverse microbes in place. And what sugar does when they measure it, when you put it into the mouth, it actually floods, the bacteria actually sense it. And so what they do is they know that a sugar load, it's actually the balance of calcium that's really important, because tooth enamel is in constant flux. It's constantly mineralizing and remineralizing, demineralizing and remineralizing. So releasing calcium and absorbing calcium. And so what sugar does is it depletes calcium in the oral environment. And so what bacteria actually do is they use calcium to build plaque. And when they sense a sugary environment, they'll actually release calcium to make sure that the tooth doesn't demineralize too much, because they know that if there's calcium in the environment, the tooth it won't have to pull from the stores. But what happens if you deplete it, when sugar is constantly introduced, the calcium stores deplete. And then eventually the bacteria need calcium in order to make their biofilms and their plaques and their homes, basically. And they eventually go into the teeth, which is what tooth decay is. So bacteria actually try and defend us against these sugar insults. And then these things happen through the body. Sugar depletes vitamin D, it depletes magnesium, it depletes these nutrients. So it really makes sense, if you have enough of these nutrients, sugar isn't that much of a problem if you don't eat it in too much of a modern sense. But the defensive factors, if they're there, if you've got this diverse microbiome, if you've got your liver stocked up with vitamin D, A, and K2, then it's not going to be a problem. And your body is designed to adapt.
Is this connected to the calcification of teeth and arteries? I think I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a really critical point that Price's work leads us to, is that one of the landmark kind of studies that kind of really dropped the penny for how important this work was for me was, I think it was 2011. You kind of might have heard the story that vitamin D and calcium supplements don't help osteoporosis. That study was on osteoporotic women being given calcium supplements and vitamin D supplements. And they showed as well, that there was no bone density increases. But what they did find was that there was an increased risk of cardiovascular events in these women taking vitamin D and calcium supplements. And so that study showed that, well, you can't just throw calcium and vitamin D at people and expect them their bones to mineralize, is that you actually have to give them the factors, the synergistic factors that help the body to place calcium. And so this is where K2 comes in, because if you just have an increase in vitamin D and non-organic calcium, then the body can't use it. And one of the strongest indicators they have for cardiovascular health today is the coronary calcium score. And that's where they take an MRI of the calcium content in the plaques of the arteries, and they find how calcified your plaques are. And that's what the study is talking about. And K2, which is what Price's Activator X was, activates the protein, matrix GLA protein, that goes around and cleans up all of the calcium throughout your arteries, throughout your kidneys, throughout your prostate. They've connected to prostate cancer, kidney disease, in the brain as well. But the fastest way to kind of get a measure of that is, when you go to the dentist and they clean off that calcified plaque behind your lower front teeth. Well, people that have calculus buildup, it's the same problem. It's plaque that's calcifying too much. The body's not placing calcium, and it's likely an imbalance between these minerals and the fat-soluble vitamins that are supposed to place them. So being this connection between cardiovascular disease and periodontal disease, for instance, it's likely all based in this problem of lack of fat-soluble vitamins, and calcification has been the core problem.
I was just thinking, I had some food with some classic LA girls, these people that kind of bought into the whole like veganish type diet, plant-based everything, but then they still eat the meat. But these foods, we're talking about nutrient density, fat soluble vitamins. The idea, if you go anywhere in LA, it's basically all foods that have none of those. Like there's these fancy like couscous or like this cauliflower this with like a million little things sprayed on it and thrown in there. And it's just like lean white chicken with a few vegetables, and they're avoiding red meat. They're avoiding everything. It's like hard to get. It's no wonder there's all these problems. You're not getting the K2. You're not getting the fat soluble vitamins if you're following any of the recommendations. Even if you throw out the food pyramid, which people have kind of figured out by now, you're still not getting it because people are fear-mongering around all the healthiest foods.
It's totally the problem. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in LA. It's similar now. There's this real kind of health culture that's kind of demonized. It's demonized meat, but we don't recognize the really nutritive parts of meat isn't the chicken breast that we were kind of taught to take the skin off and have with a dry salad, but it's the organs. And we're so disconnected from this story, and our perceptions of food. But you're absolutely right. These nutrients are really hard to get, and cultures would build the way they produce food and the way they made sure, like this special grass, because they knew if they had this grass in the springtime, that they would produce the butter for the following year that was rich in these nutrients. And you just don't get that anymore. The way that we see food now is just completely disconnected from. It's only a couple of generations too. And I just feel that's where Price's work really needs to connect people into, is once you start to see how important teeth are and jaw structure is, and how that affects risks of sleep apnea and breathing, and how that affects the brain, you can't deny that these nutrients are important for the human form. And when people come around to that way of thinking, I think it kind of, all those other ways of eating start to fall away a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I was just working on the film today. I work every day for like 4 hours and with my director, editor guy, and we're talking about the weight loss part. So in modern society, we think weight loss is equivalent to a healthy diet. Just because something can produce weight loss, we're like, oh, that's a healthy diet, when they are completely disconnected. Famously, a guy lost weight on a Twinkie diet. A vegan diet can produce weight loss because it's a bunch of low quality food without enough calories, and you end up losing weight, but you're also losing muscle. You're maybe not losing as much fat as you think. You're also not getting the fat soluble vitamins. And also famously, many vegans have terrible teeth problems. I've had some of them on my show talking about how their teeth fell apart. It was just a nightmare. This is very obvious. So it's just funny that how disconnected we are and how people just think that because it produces weight loss, not even fat loss, right? Weight loss, it could be muscle, that we just equate it to a healthy diet. And that's the LA diet. It's funny. It's like how few fat soluble vitamins and nutrients can we get? Like, how can we just fill it up with fancy couscous or something, or just non-nutritive foods? I don't know. It's weird to me.
I interviewed, I'm not sure if you've seen it, Diana Rogers, who wrote Sacred
Oh,
Cow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And she was saying how she, as a woman ordering a steak in a restaurant, she feels kind of like people look down on her for that. And, I feel as there is this kind of stigma around kind of these foods that are so important. And there's just a lot of work to be done around, how it's probably going to be difficult to kind of fix people kind of in adulthood, but for kids, you can turn their perception of food quite quickly, and you can build these foundations. And I think we really need to be, as a society, I'm talking straight from craniofacial growth, we need to prevent the next generation of kids having braces. If we get these food perceptions into this younger generation, we can stop them having these disconnected thoughts around foods. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see vegan people often do that? I mean, after it takes a couple years for it to happen, but do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, it's a little bit tragic, honestly. You see the symptoms in their face and their mouth, the way they sleep. It just screams deficiency to me. I'm kind of, when I see patients now, I try and be a bit intuitive with what's going on. Obviously, we get all the testing and stuff too. But whenever I see a person on a vegan diet, it just screams deficiency to me. And teeth are one of the foremost marker points for that. When you see chalky teeth, when you see teeth that are hollow from the outside, or there's a girl I had, she's onto her third root treatment because teeth are just so sensitive as well. And that's, to me, is telling me that she needs nutrients to start solidifying these processes in her body, and they're just not getting it. It's pretty tragic. Some people kind of go through that process. It is what it is, like I think we have to kind of let everyone.
They have a learning experience, kind of like.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot more to it. You can't talk someone out of some of these things. Okay, so you mentioned breathing and sleeping and all this stuff, and this is a whole nother area that we could get into.
Yeah, totally. That's a whole area. Yeah. So functional dentistry kind of focuses on sleep and snoring, for instance. So there's 1 billion people on the planet that have obstructive sleep or sleep apnea, and that's the brain choking at night when they sleep. And this epidemic has kind of just sprung up on us because we've missed the science. And so in the mouth, you see these things quite quickly. You see people that grind their teeth, they breathe through the mouth, and they're a huge risk factor for incorrect breathing through the night. But the big factor too is how their craniofacial form, the width of it. And so the roof of their mouth, if they have a narrow, high palate, you can tell that they're going to have difficulty breathing through the nose at night. And so people that snore, people that grind their teeth, or people that mouth breathe at night, they're often, they have a condition that is on the scale of sleep apnea, but sometimes will not be diagnosed as sleep apnea. You kind of have to have one of those polysomnograph tests to get a full diagnosis of that. But what will happen is that they've got a condition called upper airway resistance syndrome. And this is where they have the grinding teeth, they've got the digestive issues, depression, anxiety, don't sleep well, cold hands and feet. And the issue is that their autonomic nervous system isn't going into rest and digest, is stuck in fight or flight during sleep. And that's because the airway apparatus is not breathing deeply, and the brain is sensing pressure in the airways. So when the brain sees pressure, it thinks that it's choking. And so that sends an emergency response to the brain. It wakes you up out of your sleep. So that's why you get a kind of a jolt sometimes, or some people will grind their teeth. And snoring is the later end of that. So when you snore, the airway is literally closing and vibrating. Eventually, the brainstem can't deal with it anymore, and it stops breathing, and you get the brainstem kind of shutting down. So people will have kind of breaks in breathing during sleep for 20 to 30 seconds, up to a minute sometimes. And this is the brain starving of oxygen.
And so then how does this tie into all of this health stuff, vitamins?
The functional purpose of the craniofacial system is for us to eat and breathe. And so when we don't breathe correctly, when we have a narrow jaw, when we live on the diet that Price was warning us about 70 years ago, we are a generation of people that are now in a craniofacial form that doesn't support our airway. So those crooked teeth don't support our airways. And so what happens is that the reason why so many people have sleep apnea, it's a volume problem. And then you get an adaptation issue. So people that struggle to breathe through the nose, so the roof of the mouth, if you kind of just touch the roof of the mouth, that's the floor of your nasal sinus. So a narrow roof of the mouth is a narrow nasal sinus. So it's by definition a volume problem. Roughly relates, your nasal sinus should be about the size of your fist if you put it on top of your nose. And it's this kind of cavern of airway that actually warms the air. It also puts a nutrient called nitric oxide in through the air as you breathe it into your lungs, and you don't get it if you breathe through the mouth. And so people that adapt to breathe through the mouth because it's difficult to breathe through the nose because they have a narrow upper palate, they get these sleep issues. And even when you have a mildly narrow jaw, you might only, every tooth holds volume. And so if you've lost one tooth, if you have your wisdom teeth out, you've lost a set of volume in your airways. And so we're suffering the syndrome. Sleep apnea is just a symptom of a loss of what Price was talking about. It's just we've forgotten how to kind of see it that way. And the path out of it is a little bit difficult, but the first step is diagnosis, because sleep apnea and even the more silent forms of it links to heart disease, it links to obesity, it links to Alzheimer's disease, dementia. All of the big conditions are all related to sleeping poorly, and you have to breathe right to sleep well.
Well, exactly. Sleep is so important. And we've talked about it many times in the podcast. And so you have the root cause of sleeping well is breathing well. That's huge. And I had many teeth removed growing up. So I think I had just a good enough diet to not give me cavities, but I had like 4 teeth removed to have braces. And then I also had wisdom teeth removed in my 20s. And I can't breathe very well in my nose. And there's probably many people out there who just have that. I also broke my nose many times too through many sports. So I guess not just my situation, but for many people out there, what can they do? What are their options? And surgical, like at some point, do you need to get surgical?
Yeah, so there's a number of different. So a person with extraction orthodontics that's had teeth pulled out, you've lost a set of volume there. And so, so 8 teeth is pretty significant. It's kind of a tragic thing now. People we're learning, like this is something we're kind of learning a lot about. But for people that have had those issues, or they snore, or they teeth grind, or they they don't sleep well, there's a number of ways you can start to functionally breathe better. So you can breathe with the apparatus you've got. You need to learn how to. And so the first thing is, if there's a nasal obstruction, so if you've broken your nose, then sometimes an ear, nose, and throat surgeon can help you to get better volume through the nose. And that's the most rudimental way to do it. The other way to do it is to kind of, you can have things like nose cones or nose props that you wear at night that support the outer nares of the nose that help you breathe through the night. The other ways we can go about it is to look at the palate. So sometimes the palate can be expanded, and you can do this in adulthood. I do it on myself and some adults that have sleep apnea. You can actually expand the upper palate. It's slow and it's annoying. There are surgical ways that are a bit faster, but it's a bit more invasive. But you can change the bone structure if you have a high narrow palate as an adult. And then the other factor is to take away.
Well, how do you do that?
So it's like an orthodontic device. My one's like an expander that I wear at night, and I just wind it every week or so, and it kind of just slowly expands because the maxilla pulsates as you breathe. And so if you have that pressure on it, there's also a dentist I worked with in New York that does the brain scans after, and you actually build craniofacial bone in the maxilla, in the sphenoid bone, which is the base of the brain, holds the pituitary and pineal gland. It changes the facial structure as well. You can do that in an adult. Difficult, but those treatments are becoming more common now. And I think this is all where we're going, because in kids, for instance, it's really easy. Well, not really easy, but it's much easier. You can, in 2 years, you can completely change their craniofacial growth trajectory and prevent crooked teeth, the need for braces. We do that in the clinic quite regularly. In adults, it's a bit harder. The other factor is the tongue. Training the tongue to sit to the roof of the mouth is really important, because if you look at the muscles of the tongue, if you Google all the muscles of the tongue, it's like a sling that goes back to the base of the skull, opens up the neck like a tent. And the only time the tongue is opening and holding that airway open is when it's sealed to the roof of the mouth. And there's this is the posture, this is our ancestral posture that our tongue should be in. And it's this very deep tongue posture, the first spot is that the tip of your tongue has to go up behind the front two teeth, behind the where on the gum. And then the second spot is if you run your finger to the back along the roof of your mouth to where it gets soft, to the soft palate, and feel right at the back there. That's the second spot. So that's where the back of your tongue has to seal when you swallow and when you're posturing and seal. It's like a table. Your tongue should seal up there like a table. It's difficult for people that have extractions and so forth, but you can learn to use those very deep muscles. And so if you kind of play around with that back of the tongue, hitting that soft palate a bit and holding it there, you'll feel a very deep set of muscles in the neck start to, they'll feel kind of sore. They're the muscles you have to turn on to support the airway, because they should be on all the time. And anytime you're not talking, eating, or doing something with your mouth, you should be supporting that. In the dental chair, I really try and focus on, so for instance, I've really helped out my back and neck and everything with my posture. I do a lot of work with the computer as well by focusing on tongue posture. And the way you do it is that if your swallow response is resetting your posture, so your shoulders going down and back, your neck is straightening up, and your chin's going in slightly, so it's tipped down, and then your tongue goes up and back into that spot, and it should be like a deep gulping sound, and there should be kind of any kind of liquid. So we train this in kids to do it, but if you learn to do that, and every time you swallow, you build that posture into your daytime kind of practice, at nighttime you strengthen these muscles and they stay open. And the other thing you can do is taping the mouth. I tape my mouth too, so tongue exercises. And then the other part of it is voice exercises too. So for men or for anyone with snoring issues, they've shown that the Australian didgeridoo with the cyclical breathing can help reverse sleep apnea because they learn to use a wind instrument. It's all about breathing and breath work. And so yoga helps a lot. If you don't breathe well in the day, you don't breathe well at night. So for most people, they can do exercise-based things. And these things get worse as you get older too. So it's important to kind of become mindful of it, especially in middle age, because if you don't, it becomes sleep apnea in 20 years' time, and then you go down that road. But it's critical. It's changed my life doing it personally, because just for my own sleep, it took me 3 months to be able to tolerate taping the mouth. I'm not sure if you tried it, but I would wake up.
How do you do it? No, I haven't yet. You just get tape and put it on your mouth.
It's like and look, some people are nasal breathers. I wasn't, and I was noticing, I was just going down the road I definitely had upper airway resistance syndrome. I could feel the half Asian, so I kind of get the flat maxilla. And so Asians kind of get the snoring behind the nose because of the upper jawbone there. And what I found that my brain wouldn't tolerate the volume of air very well, because when you breathe through the nose slowly, it's a slower volume of air, and your brainstem actually has to adapt to the rising CO2. And this rising CO2 is what your brain needs. When you mouth breathe shallowly, you can't tolerate that slow diaphragmatic breath right deep into the belly. Your brainstem doesn't adapt, and it'll actually panic, and you have to train it to be better with CO2.
Wow. I've heard about this thing where you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Some guy, I don't know if he reached out to me or what, mewing. He's trying to like brand it himself or something. Mike Mew.
Yeah, Mike
Mew.
Anything? Yeah, so John and Mike Mew, they're UK orthodontists. John Mew was he's been jumping up and down about this stuff for a long time, how extraction orthodontics is ruining faces. And Mike made a YouTube channel on this stuff. He's got some great things. That he really focuses on that posterior tongue seal. He's got this huge YouTube audience of people doing it, and he's kind of caught on with adolescent kind of males who see that there's value in getting chiseled cheeks and changing their jaw.
Yeah.
Right?
I saw that. Yeah. They show the before and after, and then the chin comes out. That's what I was saying, the profile view when you have that weak chin. So I didn't know if it was legit or not, but now you're describing this practice of using your tongue. And so I guess mewing is legit.
Yeah. It's a way of using his practice is to improve this in his patients, and he gets better orthodontic results out of it because you're treating the cause. So most people, I'm not sure after your orthodontics, if you have a retainer, and if you don't have a retainer, then your teeth move.
Lost it.
Yeah,
22 years ago. I probably wore it for a year or two, but yeah,
exactly. But the reason why they put retainers on is because teeth move, but it's because you haven't addressed the function. If you address the function, that the mouth is the retainer. So it kind of shows that you're not treating the root cause. You're just dragging the teeth to where they look straight, but actually the jaw is in a place where it really shouldn't be. And some people get quite bad jaw pain after orthodontic work because their posture and their breathing is still not treated, and their jaws really aren't happy where they are, as they've been dragged by the braces.
Well, good stuff. So we're giving some actionable stuff for people to do. You have a book called The Dental Diet. I'm sure we covered a lot of things at a high level today, but what else is in there? Do you have more kind of actionable advice for people as well that will be in that book?
Yeah, so it's the 40-day food plan that I find that's similar to what the products you're trying to get out there, and the connecting back to ancestral eating in a modern sense, because I went through this whole thing. I read Price's book. I was like, how do you do this today, right? So I went back and I made a 40-day food plan. I did a 2-week completely no sugar, and I kind of detox out of it, and I wrote it all in. But I also wrote in kind of the scientific, so there's nearly 400 references in it that connects Price's story through this. So, we're understanding why fat-soluble vitamins, not only prevent tooth decay, but are critical for the gut and the brain, and preventing osteoporosis later in age. Breathing and sleep, breath work before eating, the oral microbiome, understanding fermented foods and making ferments at home. These are the kind of things that I try to tell patients, but it's difficult to kind of do it in an appointment when they're kind of got a problem in there. So that's why I wrote the book, to try and help people to build it into their family life.
I love it. It's great. Sounds like we're speaking the same language. The sapien diet, probably very similar to the dental diet. And I always say, I didn't make up the sapien diet. It's just, this is the correct human diet. And it's not one diet, it's a framework. And that's why everyone I talk to on the podcast has basically their own version of this diet, because it is the human diet.
Yeah, totally. It's I've just got a couple of different type of recipes, but it's exactly, this is what humans need to eat. And, I'm coming purely from a dental point of view, but then trying to show people that the mouth connects to the rest of the body, as Price was telling us.
Yeah, it's the ideal diet. All right, well, if you could stick around, I have a few more questions. We do a little Sapien Tribe bonus episode for people who are part of the Sapien Tribe. But thank you so much, and great stuff. This is really good info. Thanks.
Huge pleasure, Brian. Yeah, I love your work, and yeah, it's completely connected to it's great to kind of see people that living Price's message, right?
Trying to spread the word.
Appreciate it, Brian. Enjoyed it.
Okay, there we go. What a guy. His stuff goes way beyond dentistry, but it's really great to have a functional dentist on. I want to have a functional, holistic health, nutrition focused, lifestyle focused version of every doctor on. If you know anyone, please let me know. I want to get the best skin doctor, the best gut health doctor, all the different specialties, because so few of the mainstream physicians have things figured out in an evolutionary and diet and lifestyle context. So please send people my way that you know of. Please also give this show a review, share it with friends and family, start back at episode 1. Go to nosetotail.org for all the great meats and the new regenerative products. And go to sapien.org for the program and the tribe. We're doing a lot of great things, so please check us out. Support the show, and see you next week.